let me get back to my bio real quick here. Um, so anyway, like I said earlier, we have Sarah Letts with us. After retiring from the military, she wanted a self-sufficient family farm, and so she started Sky Island Farm. It's an organic permaculture farm in the Santa Ana Mountains of Southern California, centered between San Diego and Los Angeles. Her Maremmas guard chickens, turkeys, sheep, cattle, horses, bee colonies from all kinds of predators, including coyotes and bobcats, mountain lions, aerial predators, foxes, and raccoons. Um, she appreciates the Maremma breed for their superb guardian instinct and excellent temperament, capability of handling guardian duties, and being an overall wonderful family dog. She finds that their history is exciting, and that the dogs are a combination of I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but the Abruzzo Mastiff and the more recent Maremma, unique among purebred livestock guardian dogs. Um, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Sarah, and feel free to give some more background on what you've been doing with livestock guardian dogs and kind of your ranch history and stuff.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I got my start in this breed about 12 years ago, and I had, for Southern California, a fairly big piece of acreage, just over 16 acres. That's not anything compared to some of the acreages that I know some people farm and ranch. Um, but I wanted chickens and I wanted turkeys, and I got some, and they started disappearing. And so I started the process of researching livestock guardian dogs. And at that point, I'd already been raising and breeding giant dogs since like 1986. But I'd never really gotten into the livestock guardian dog world because I never had livestock. So at the time that I got my first Maremma, I was showing and breeding Greater Swiss Mountain Dogs. And I really didn't like the show world. So it was one of the things important to me was to find a breed that was not an AKC breed, because I just wanted a breed that was focused on really the working qualities, physicality, and temperament of that breed, and that's how I came to around to Maremmas. And I see a lot of posts and questions on different boards and social media pages and stuff about how to get started without fencing and all that. I went and spent probably, I don't know, $800 on some electric net fencing from Premier One Supplies. I think our Spot On also makes them, and you basically just put up that temporary fencing, just push it into the ground, put a solar controller on it, and bam, you have a fenced area for livestock. So I got me some goats, and I put 4 goats in there on a piece of land that was probably only like 300 feet by 300 feet. It was not of any substantial size. And then I bought a Maremma, my first Maremma, at 4 months, and by the time she was 6 months old, she was really big enough and ready to guard. She wanted to guard. She would, go around the goats and guard them. And so I put her in with them. And that's how I got my start. And now I've got my entire property fenced. I've got several different other kinds of livestock. And I have multiple Maremmas to protect them all. And it had been 4 or 5 years since this happened to me, but just on Monday morning, I went down to feed the sheep, and a very silly coyote had come over the fence, and maybe just to catch a bunny or two, because of course my Maremmas protect the rabbits, so it's kind of a rabbit sanctuary. But that coyote did not survive the encounter because it had gone over the fence. So they are very capable guardians. They're sort of considered a little bit on the soft side of the continuum of guardian personalities, if you will. I think that's mostly because they're easier to train to poultry. They're easier to train to visitors and small children, and they learn very quickly how to be gentle around seniors and kids. But that doesn't make them any less capable killers when the time comes to be a capable killer. So, and hopefully nobody will ever even need that, but that they're perfectly capable of that. And they were bred originally in central and southern Italy to handle wolf populations and bears, and they still do. They still do that. What drew me to the Maremma, the reason why my research kind of focused in down to considering all the breeds. I mean, everything from, Russian Ovchakras and Tibetan Mastiffs, Great Pyrenees, Kuvas, Polish Tatras. I mean, I had a whole list, Akbash. I had a whole list on my on that I was looking at as I was researching breeds and deciding which breed to get, and things that meant a lot to me that were mentioned in the literature and the research that I could find online that were unique about the Maremma or less common among LGDs were the traits of close guarding, which means staying with the livestock instead of necessarily challenging fencing and creating your own territory. The Maremmas are a known close guard breed. They're also a breed known to be relatively easy to train to poultry, which was important to me. They're also a fantastic family dog. They were and probably one of the most important things to me is they're intentional barkers. They don't bark all the time to create a territory to deter predators. Instead, they mark their territory on the fence line, and then they only alert when they actually need to alert. And so I might have an entire night go by and not hear a single Maremma bark on my property, but the coyotes have been busy. It's coyote pupping season, so the coyotes have been very busy, and so my dogs have been very, very busy at night, and warning them all off, which obviously didn't one coyote didn't take that seriously and paid the consequences. Um, I so those things are really important to me: the close guarding, the intentional barking, the respecting of the fences that I put up. And I will say, like most LGDs, when Maremmas go through puberty, they will challenge boundaries. They'll challenge their training. They'll challenge just about everything. Kind of like you got to think of yourself as, what does a teenage boy do? Well, that's what a Maremma in puberty or any LGD in puberty is certainly capable of. But when they settle down, they're very predictable close guarders and intentional barkers. My dogs, when I first got my first Maremmas, I took them all to rattlesnake aversion training, which is because we have a huge rattlesnake population where I live in California. I'm in the mountain chain that's kind of between the coastal plain, down where you have all the beaches, and then there's a mountain chain called the Santa Ana Mountains, and that's where I live. The Santa Ana winds are named for us. Isn't that nice? But it's very rural up here, and so they definitely have the space to move around and do their job, but they also can be very flexible about visitors coming on the property. I introduce them all to the UPS guy. They all know the UPS guy. They'll walk up into the truck to get a cookie from the UPS guy. But if somebody who they don't know comes on the property, that person essentially isn't allowed out of the car, and they alert a lot to that. The rattlesnake training that I had done for my older dogs, I did four dogs, I think, got the actual aversion training, and I haven't had to do it yet since. I do the rattlesnake vaccine, which is important where I live, but I don't need to do the training anymore because my adults now train the younger ones, and they actually all have a snake bark, which is a different alert than coyotes or whatever. But then they also have a rattlesnake bark, which I really appreciate because I can distinguish which one I need to go out and actually act on. And they have found plenty of rattlesnakes and let me know over the years, and I really do appreciate that. I try to rehome or remove the rattlesnakes when I can, but the truth is they're territorial, and a lot of the times they'll come back. So I have to deal with rattlesnakes if they're too close to the house or too close to the livestock. Um, Something that's kind of unique about the breed is that, unlike a lot of the LGD breeds, that Kuvas hail from Hungary, Polish Tatras hail obviously from Poland. The Maremmas hail from Italy, but there actually were two different breeds there. And in the 1950s, for show purposes, after they started creating dog registrations and dog fancy clubs, there was actually one club for the Abruzzese Mastiff dogs, and there was a different club for the Maremmanos. And the Abruzzo region, it doesn't butt up directly against Tuscany, where the Maremmanos were kind of hybridized, but they're only about 80 kilometers or 50 miles apart. So you can imagine that the folks on the East Coast in Abruzzo who were raising larger, stockier, more mastiff type dogs, would work with the folks just to their east in the area around Rome and Tuscany, where the Maremmanos were more common. And so in the 1950s, the Italians decided for their registration and their show needs that they were going to combine those two breeds, even though there were quite a bit of significant differences. Physicality wise, they were very much alike in terms of their guarding temperament and how they handled different issues. And so that is because they wanted show dogs and they wanted one standard. That's what happened. My dates may be a little fuzzy because I've read in one place that it happened in 1951, another 1956, another 1958. So I'm not in Italy to research and find out the exact date, but it was in the 1950s that the two breeds were combined into one for those show purposes. And as is true in a lot of Europe, and very specifically Italy, a lot of working dogs, working farm dogs, and working livestock guardians are also show dogs, and they raise their dogs with, with learning how to show and also learning how to guard. Here in the USA, the Maremma Club decided that they really wanted to focus on the guarding and working capabilities of the breed. And so they are not an AKC breed. Whereas, for instance, a lot of people ask the difference between Maremmas and Pyrenees. Pyrenees have been an AKC breed since 1927. So a long time. The interesting thing is that there really are these two phenotypes of Maremmas out there. One is the heavier boned, more mastiff-like. The head is described as a lion or a polar bear. And that's the Abruzzo Mastiff. Their coat can be curly and coarse. And then on the Maremmano side, the dogs are slighter, they're more agile, they're more lithe, but they have more of a wolf kind of build to them and head to them. And so, a lot of litters, you'll pop out a couple of puppies that'll be, one phenotype and, some that are the other phenotype. And so it is an interesting history because most of the LGD breeds out there don't really have this written history of the two breeds being combined. And then they came up with the name, Pastore de Maremmano Abruzzese, to combine the breeds. And so what's happened, there was always disagreement over that, as there kind of are in every breed over different things. But in I'm not sure how exactly when it started, but the Italians decided that they wanted to do a DNA analysis to figure out which of those phenotypes, the Abruzzese or the Maremmano, were the original. Where did the dogs originate from? And so they did this research, and they found out that actually the older phenotype of the dog is the larger, heavier boned Abruzzese Mastiff. And of course, nobody knows for sure, and it would be great if somebody would do the DNA research, but it's also postulated that the Abruzzese Mastiff was bred from Turkish, potentially Akbash dogs with the Roman Mastiff soldier dogs, fighting war dogs. And that's where they came from. And that a lot of the other European giant white LGD breeds were actually hybridized from those Abruzzese Mastiffs. Now, I don't have any proof of that. The DNA research hasn't been done on other breeds, but within the Maremma Abruzzese breed, the Abruzzese is older. And I believe it was the summer of 2021 now that the Italian club, the Italian version of the AKC, which is the ENCI, they actually changed the breed standard to allow for larger and heavier dogs in a nod to the fact that the Abruzzese really are a larger phenotype of the breed. So that's kind of an interesting history. It's a little bit unique that the Italians did that, and that they very recently actually changed the breed standard. And there's not been any suggestion that they split the breeds or that they rename the breed to have Abruzzese in front of Maremma. I know, actually, if you talk to Italian breeders, there's a lot of feelings there about this, about the fact that it was done in the first place, how to undo it, whether to undo it. But none of that really affects me. Thankfully, I'm in the U.S. and we pretty much, have the dogs for guarding purposes primarily. There are some people who breed for companion purposes, but Maremmas don't do great in my experience as companion dogs. Certain dogs do, but the vast majority are really, they come from working lines here in the US. There aren't a whole lot of companion lines. That's very different than Australia, where there are a lot of companion lines of Maremmas. And they're just going to be different dogs because people are breeding for the qualities they want. And if you want a dog that's not nocturnal, then, you pick the one in the litter that's awake, at during the day and sleeping at night. Whereas, Maremmas and many LGD breeds are the exact opposite. They're essentially nocturnal dogs. Trying to think, I wanted to mention that the Great Pyrenees have been in the US for, I believe they came over in like the 1880s or something, but they've been used as, sort of royal dogs back to the 1600s in France. There were Great Pyrenees that, were estate guardians on the king's properties and such. Whereas Maremmas really only became known over here in the US in 1976, and that's when the Coppingers did a study at Hampshire College at the time in the mid 70s. There was a lot of human predation on predators, so lots of coyote killing, lots of wolf killing, or poisoning, shooting, whatever. We didn't have any really natural methods of keeping our livestock safe. And so the Coppingers actually did a study out of Hampshire College, and they went to Europe and they did a lot of research there over what kinds of dogs are used and bred where. And they came back with a pair of Anatolians, a pair of Sarpliniacs, and a pair of Maremmas. And then they grew this study from those three breeds, where they placed pairs of these dogs with different ranchers and, actually studied how well they handled predation. I think there was an earlier study in 1975 that was actually done by the USDA in Idaho, and that was done on Commodores. But the whole idea of using livestock guardian dogs to handle predator problems in the US is fairly new. It's really not that old. People started importing other livestock guardian breeds pretty much in the 1980s, and like the first working lines of Great Pyrenees came to the U.S. in the 1980s. one of the things that I appreciate about the breed is because Maremmas, at least here in the U.S., are really kept by the club as a pure working breed, not a conformation breed. It's there's mostly working lines. You don't have it's not nearly as hard as it is with some breeds to find working lines versus companion dog lines. It's easier with the Maremmas. So I think that's kind of all I had to put out. I'd love to take questions on training or breeding or recommendations that people are interested in getting. Like I said, I'm not the be all and know all, but I do have good experience in breeding giant dogs and also in breeding Maremmas. I'm very, very proud of the work that I do with my breeding program. My parents are all hip tested. They're all in the chick database. You can look them up online and see, what all of my dogs have in terms of health certificates. And I think that that's really important for breeders of any breed, but especially livestock guardian dogs, to have that documentation out there where people doing research can actually find out, who is a breeder who's transparent about their dog's health. And I I welcome people to come to my farm. I'm uh, fairly strict about biosecurity. So if you want to come on my farm and do a farm visit, it involves things like wearing shoe covers and using Clorox wipes in your hands. And if you want to visit, puppies that are really young, you have to mask up. But I do want to encourage people to come and see the farm and see how the dogs work in protecting the livestock that I have. I've got about 40 chickens, about 10 turkeys. I have 9 baby doll sheep. 5 of them are girls, and they are all just about to lamb. I just got 30 new baby chicks. And I have a couple of horses and cows on the property. So the Maremmas have a lot of different things to do. And they are very busy, but they also work extremely well together. My oldest Maremma is now almost 12, and she will just sit up at the top of no 11, sorry. She will sit up at the top of the driveway and at the highest point on the property and basically just give directions to everybody. We call her ground traffic control, because she doesn't move around a whole lot anymore. She's got arthritis. And I'm on a very steep piece of land, so she's got to walk downhill and uphill from pretty much anywhere to anywhere. But she loves to stand at the top, and you'll hear her at night just, telling everybody what to do, and they are all out doing it. So I love the breed, and I'd love to answer any questions about the breed, like I said, or training, breeding, whatever comes to mind. I'm happy to engage.
Yeah, well, we've got a few questions in the chat. Hopes we just got some more. Um, so Elizabeth says that she's adopting a 2-year-old Maremma next week. His family is giving him to her because their property is not fenced, and he leaves the property when they do, and they're concerned that he's going to get hit by a car. Since he's never had a fence, she'd like some recommendations on teaching him to respect fencing. She has a 4 and 5 foot fencing. He ignores shot collars, and her fence is not hot wired. But she'd love any suggestions you might have.
So, how big was the property again?
She didn't say how large her property was. It's just where he came from, there wasn't any fencing, and so
Right.
he follows people when they go
It's
to leave.
5 acres.
Okay. So on 5 acres, it kind of depends how you're set up. I mean, that if you have your livestock in one smaller area and you either put your Maremma, in with them or on the perimeter, then you're gonna have a smaller area that you have to worry about hot wire. Obviously, you don't want the Maremma getting out, and so there has to be some pretty significant consequences when the Maremma challenges the fencing. It is harder, if dogs are raised without respecting fences, it's harder to teach that to them. I've put in, I struggled a little bit because I had a couple of dogs that would leave the property. They wouldn't wander the neighborhood. They would literally, I had tractive collars on them, and they would literally do an exterior perimeter run and then come right back in. But I got some new neighbors, didn't want to deal with that, worried about cars, all those other things that you mentioned. And so I ended up putting up sport dog fencing with the shock collars, and it's worked great for me. It's worked phenomenal for me. The dogs that were leaving the property are no longer leaving the property. So when you say shock collars don't work, I'm not sure what kind of, whether you were using a training collar or whether you're using a containing collar. I know Sport Dog makes one that's called Contain and Train, and it kind of does a little bit of each. So you can manually, give the dog a correction, but also it gets a correction from the RF wire that you've strung around your property. Unfortunately, you have to be really tough with dogs that aren't going to be, respect fencing. If your property is relatively small and you can find a way to tether the dog in with the livestock, then I would recommend that. You have to be very careful when you tether a dog to make sure there's nothing that they could get caught on, that, the tether could get caught on. When I was first training, my puppies were always great. They were great with the lambs, they were great with the baby chicks, and great with the chickens and turkeys. But as soon as they got into that puberty period of time, a lot of times there's boundary testing. And so I have a couple of methods. One is to tether them for a period of time during the day with the livestock. The other is to tie them to a tire so that they can move, but they've got to drag that tire so that they can't move that fast, not fast enough to catch any livestock. And, so there are another, sort of controversial training technique is using a dangle stick or putting a big triangle of PVC tubing around your dog's collar so that they basically can't fit through the holes that they dig. Now, those are controversial because, of course, they involved some discomfort to the dog. The dog could get injured trying to climb out with, big pieces of PVC stuck to their head to prevent them from doing that. I think your best bet is to hotwire your fencing and use either the RF collar or just put hot wire down on the bottom and put hot wire up top. When I first moved to my property, I put 2 strands of hot wire up top, one about 6 inches and one about a foot up because of my coyote problem. The other problem that it resolved for me was that the turkeys like to roost on my fencing with their tails on the outside of my property, and the coyotes would literally just come along and grab one like it was a lollipop stick. So I had to put up the hot wire to keep the birds from roosting there to save their lives. But I hope that's helpful on the fencing issue. You do have to invest. You've invested in your dog. You have to invest in the fencing that will teach your dog to stay in. And so I hope some of these ideas have been helpful.
Next question. This is from David. He says he has a few Great Pyrenees that wouldn't stay on the property. His Anatolian stays put. And so he wants to know if Maremmas stay put or they're more prone to wander like Great Pyrenees.
They are bred to close guard. The problem is if you put a Maremma with a bunch of Pyrenees who are breaking out all the time, then the Maremma is going to learn those bad habits. So you need to have a completely different training program for your Maremma. It might have a genetic predisposition to stay close to the farm, but if it's hanging out with its pack and they're leaving, then you're probably not going to get that result. From the research that I've done and reading that I've done, there's really good reasons why every different breed of LGD has some of the different traits that they have. And a great example is the difference between Great Pyrenees and Maremmas, who look a lot alike in many ways. The Pyrenees have a slightly rounder head and their ears are lower. The Maremmas have a flatter head and their ears are higher on the head above their eyes. But they're very physically similar and they're very, very characteristically similar. But two of the things that Great Pyrenees do that Maremmas are genetically not disposed to do are wandering and continuous barking. And the reason why, in the research that I've done, is actually because of what the shepherds in the Pyrenees, in those Alps, what they needed their dog to do. The Pyrenees are extremely high mountains. They're extremely rocky. The dogs were expected to go up with the livestock and stay perhaps several days without even a shepherd there to protect them. There was no fencing. They created their own territory for their stock, and they defended it by barking pretty much incessantly. This is mine, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, because there was no physical fencing to make that distinction for a predator. Maremmas, on the other hand, especially in the Abruzzo region, the older region where they were initially bred, has much lower mountain chain called the Apennines, but their highest mountain isn't even 10,000 feet high. So it would be much more typical in an Italian situation for a shepherd to take the sheep and dogs out in the morning and graze them and then bring them back in at night. And so the dogs would be inside the village walls at night. And so they were taught, just over years of people breeding the ones that obeyed the rules they wanted. They generally respect fences, respect walls. They're considered a close guarding breed, which, will back up with the livestock to guard rather than running out to try and find the predator, which is more typical of the Pyrenees. And the Maremmas didn't need to bark all the time because there was already a boundary set. So they're intentional barkers. They bark when there's something to bark at. They're not barking to set a territory boundary. So I like to use that comparison between the Pyrenees and the Maremmas because they are so alike in so many ways, but they really have these differences, and there's good reasons for the differences. I mean, if you were a shepherd 2,000 years ago in the Pyrenees, you were breeding together the dogs that did a great job of setting their own territory and managing it by themselves. If you were an Italian shepherd 2,000 years ago, you wanted a dog that would work hard during the day and then come home, and at night while you were sleeping in your village would only alert and bark to something that was you actually had to go outside and handle. Um, so they bred the breeds that they needed, which is kind of what all land race breeds are. Is people are breeding to what their needs are, and I myself am doing that. I love the coat on a typical Maremmano, which is generally straighter and sleeker, slightly softer coat. The Abruzzese dogs tend to have a very coarse and curly coat. I prefer the easier coat. I live in an area with lots of burrs and lots of stickers, and it's a misery to get the mats out of an Abruzzo coat, but the Maremmano coat is much easier. So I take the qualities from the dogs that I like and breed them together to get the dogs that I need for my farm. So I too am breeding land race dogs. I think we all are. We're all breeding for what we need. So that's kind of how you get differences between GPs and Maremmas.
So next up is Aaron. He's looking, or she, sorry, is looking at switching to Maremmas from Pyrenees, and their current dog has some degeneration in her front elbow. She knew about the hips, but she didn't know about elbows could break down that way, and she wanted to know if Maremmas have the same issues in the breed.
So, as I think has been studied and proven fairly well, that when there is a registry that breeds that what's the best way to put this? When there's a registry that basically suggests and encourages breeding based on conformation and the dog's looks, you end up having more health problems. And the AKC accepted the Great Pyrenees as a registered dog in their book back in 1927. And they really weren't brought here until the 1980s to guard. So there are a lot more Great Pyrenees companion dog lines in the US than there are Maremmas. And because Maremmas were bred primarily and are used primarily here in the US as working LGDs, they just haven't had as many of the health problems that pop up from people doing too much inbreeding or breeding strictly for looks instead of breeding for working temperament and working qualities. So are Maremmas starting to have some of those problems? Yes, they are. Hip dysplasia is making it's on an upswing in the breed here in the U.S. You can get elbow degeneration too. As a breeder, I have a strict code that I live by, where I don't breed dogs until they've had those hip and elbow tests. I use OFA. Some people use pen hip. But I don't breed dogs until I've actually seen, what the parents' joints look like. So, you definitely have, I would say there's less of it, less joint degeneration issues and less health issues in the Maremma than there are in the Pyrenees. But there's not a breed out there that doesn't have epigenetic, problems. One of the things that you can see in the breed is entropion. That's when they're born and their eyelashes turn in toward their eye instead of out. And that's another really easy fix, but it is a genetic thing that can happen. I've seen osteochondritis in Maremmas one time. That's where you have a degenerated shoulder joint. There's a surgery for that pretty much is a 100% fix, and that's what I did on my dog and never had another problem. And he lived till age 9. So, there are different genetic problems that are cropping up in the breed more commonly, since there are more of them now in the U.S. and in Australia and in other European countries outside of Italy. And so you're just bound to unfortunately introduce some of the genetic problems, but there are fewer with Maremmas.
So next up, Peggy wanted to know, would the coats on Maremmas do better in cooler climates, hotter, or they do well either way?
So one of my things on my list when I went to figure out what kind of livestock guardian I wanted had to do with heat, because I live in Southern California. It can get really, really hot here. At my house, the hottest it's ever got was 110, but that's still plenty hot. Not too far away from me, it was 122 on that same day. Maremmas are a Mediterranean breed. The Abruzzo Mastiff, originated just a little bit north of, the heel on the Italian boot. And the Maremmanos are from the Tuscany region, which is a little bit further north and on the west side, nearer to Rome. But they are Mediterranean dogs and they can handle Mediterranean heat. I initially worried that they wouldn't be able to coat up like a Pyrenees to handle the cold temperatures, but I was incorrect. They basically can coat up a tremendous amount, and I have placed puppies in Alaska. I've placed them in Canada. They do just fine. A good friend of mine is a Maremma owner in Minnesota. I mean, so they are perfectly fine navigating, the negative 50 degree temperatures that hit some of these very cold zones. They just coat up more. And then they blow coat more when the spring comes, and you could probably make yourself a nice coat of your own with all the shed that they lose. But they do seem more comfortable in the summers than some of the dogs that are from more northern parts of the world. For me, all of my dogs have a baby pool with 6 inches of water nearby wherever they're guarding. I do put up mister systems for them, and they always kind of have a muddy patch, and there's always shade. And what I've found is that as long as I'm, providing plenty of water, misters, baby pool, mud, and shade, they do just fine. They pant a lot, but they do just fine.
Okay, so next question is from Katie. She wants to know if a Maremma wasn't raised with poultry as a puppy, but will have to guard poultry as an adult. How do you, or do you have any recommendations, I guess, on making that transition?
Sure. So, some people actually have livestock guardian dogs that are in love with their chicks and their chickens. In my experience, there's not usually that much of a love relationship. You've been successful when the livestock guardian dog is bored. when it is guarding something, but happy bored, not like bored and I want to, play with you, but just like bored, like I've been through this, all this clucking and flapping, and it doesn't interest me. And so you're basically building not necessarily a relationship between the chickens and the dog. You're just building a relationship of boredom, and the best way to do that is to restrict the dog right in there with the chickens, maybe initially out with a fence between them. But when I want to train my puppies, I just take them in with me and have them wander around and correct anybody who wants to, make contact with the chicken or even chase. But then I find that during puberty, a lot of those lessons, they're lessons learned, but then they start testing boundaries. And that's when I'll take them into the chicken area and I'll put them on a tether, or I'll tie them to a tire so that they can rest and walk around comfortably, but not have direct access to the birds. And when they just build that sort of, it's customary to them, it's old news. When all that gets built in, you'll find that they are not interested in chasing chickens or other poultry. It's very uncommon for a Maremma who's reached full maturity of 2 to 3 years to be really interested in chasing poultry. But it can be challenging to get them to that age where they finally accepted that, yeah, these aren't play are part of my charges. So it's just kind of, you have to work through the puberty thing, but there's not, you can always, the whole you can't teach an old dog a tricks thing is a complete lie. I've taught my older dogs all kinds of new things, and I've transitioned adult dogs as old as 5 years old to different farms. And yes, there's a procedure you have to follow to make it a good and non-traumatic transition for the adult dog, but it's very possible. And it's very possible to teach a dog, even a dog that's been a chicken killer, with the right amount of patience and the right amount of restriction. You can turn that dog into a dog that's not going to kill chickens anymore. So I have very good hopes for you that as long as your dog is near or with the chickens all the time without being able to actually grab one, that they will build that kind of just, kind of lackadaisical attitude. They're much more interested in the territory boundary of the fencing and what's going on there than they are with their actual charges with the birds. Now, that's not to say that I haven't had the Maremma that fell in love with, baby chicks and just went around moony-eyed all the time, hanging out with the birds. That there are those dogs too. But I would say most of my dogs are much more focused on their territory boundary and making sure that nothing's coming through there, regardless of what's on the inside.
So the next question is from Lori. It's kind of the opposite of the one that we just had. So she's got a 14-week-old pup, and she wants to know the best way to, I guess, basically bond the pup to the poultry.
So a 14-week-old pup is kind of the equivalent to a human toddler, like 2 to 3 years old, maybe, 18 months, maybe. So they're definitely not ready for that kind of responsibility. But what you can do is you can make it so this is something commonplace in their lives. It's not exciting, it's not interesting, by taking the puppy in with you as you do your chores in and around poultry, having the puppy right outside, maybe, tethered where it's right next to the fencing, so the poultry is constantly, there. As a breeder, I whelp my dogs right outside my poultry enclosure. So the puppies are literally raised until 8 weeks, one fence line away, with just a fence between them and the chickens and turkeys. But that's not to say that at 14 weeks, a puppy couldn't, go in with you to do chores and then start chasing. So you want to be sure that you're there. You want to be sure that you're giving them lots of praise when they're acting correctly, when they're just sitting or walking quietly and slowly. Make sure you praise, 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 praise. But then if there's any chasing or anything like that, then what I do at 14 weeks is I don't even bother using the word no. I growl. Puppies know what a growl means. They're learning at that age what a no means. So when I need to tell a puppy, pretty much, Honestly, all of my dogs respond because this is how I've raised them. When a dog is doing something I don't want, I just so I basically, do what mama does to let them know that's not the correct behavior. So for a 14-week-old puppy, I would have it in with you. If it's not even safe to go in, then leash it and hold it on a leash the whole time. Most puppies I've worked with at that age, you can take them in with you and they'll be relatively submissive and, interested in the birds, but not interested in chasing them. And the more that you can do that and just get the dog used to the birds, the better you are. And it really is just, again, it's boredom. It's when this is commonplace and I'm used to flapping and clucking and running around and feathers flying and stuff like that. When that doesn't phase them, then you have a successful poultry guardian. But again, you're not looking for the dog to fall in love with them. You're looking for the dog to be bored enough that it's focused on its boundary and challenges anything that challenges anything that comes up to that boundary. That's what you're looking for. So again, I would just remind you that just as you wouldn't expect a toddler to be able to drive a car, you're going to have to be very, very involved in any kind of direct interaction between a 14-week-old puppy and poultry. And you just get them in the habit of every single time you go in to do your chores, you take the puppy with you. You praise, praise, praise when the puppy's doing well. You correct when the puppy's not, and then you remove the puppy until the next time you go in. And pretty soon this is going to become such a regular part of the puppy's life that, poultry aren't going to be interesting anymore. Like I said, some dogs of any breed, and any LGD breed can have a long and difficult puberty. And some people do give up, before they get to 2 years or 3 years, they give up thinking this isn't going to work. I can tell you that they'll all settle down eventually. But when a puppy's 14 weeks, you just want to make sure that you give them limited access and complete supervision.
Next question is from Sky. She's got several questions here. So her first one is, have you trained young dogs to not chase or rough play with their charges? And then she also wants to know if you have any specific techniques to keep the dog from jumping. And then last, which I think you kind of covered a little bit already, is, the best way to bond them to stock.
So my trick for young dogs is the growl. And just watching my mama dogs for years and years and years, watching them train up their pups, because mama doesn't start growling at her puppies until they're starting to wean. And when they approach her food bowl and she's weaning them, she will growl at them. And as they get older, as they, that's maybe in the 4 to 5 week period, as they get older, up to, 5 to 6 weeks, 6 to 7 weeks, mama gets, even more pointed about her correction. She will not only growl at them, but she'll put her mouth down and open her mouth and actually squeeze their snout. And if they still don't listen, she'll flip them over onto their back and kind of growl with her face right above theirs. That's what mama dog does. And that's what, dogs are genetically programmed to understand as their first language. I mean, the language you speak is definitely not their first language. So I have found that for me, it works extremely well to use mama's techniques. So when I want to train, all my young dogs are trained to, when I growl, something is wrong and they need to stop whatever they're doing and look at me to understand what it is. And for dogs that are like coming up on you from the front and they're jumping up on you, or they're coming up from behind or the side and they're side swiping you and putting their, maybe grabbing your hand with their teeth thinking I'm saying hello, because of course they don't have hands. So you got to remember, puppies have to learn that they don't have hands and they can't use their mouth as a hand. But when I train puppies like that, I usually use my feet and my knees. So if a dog is coming at me from the front, I literally lift my knee up and right into the puppy's nose. And that's a no. And then I growl while I'm doing that. I do what I call a cow kick. So I've watched my cow, the way that she trains the puppies to stay away from her is she'll just stand in one place. And if they come too close, she'll give a little kick. She never connects with them, but she'll give a little kick as a warning. And it's fascinating to me how many different directions a cow can kick with her legs. But I actually walk around with my groups of puppies, and I actually sort of flail my legs around each time I pick up a foot. I'm sort of kneeing to the front, I'm kicking to the side, and kicking behind me. And the puppies learn very, very quickly not to approach me from any side because they could easily catch a foot full of a face full of heel or whatever. And it's been a very successful technique for me, especially with young puppies. Teach them really, really young not to approach you that way. Growl at them if they use their teeth on you. Give their snout a squeeze. I'm very strict very early with the puppies, and so I find that I just don't have a lot of the management and training issues later because they already know. My one trick that I highly recommend to everybody in every situation is you can't just do corrections. You have to praise. My rule is I tell all my puppy buyers, you have to praise the dog 4 times for every one correction you give it. So that means that everybody in your family should be, every time they see the dog, and I call it catch it doing good. Don't wait for the dog to do something you want it to do. If it's just lying calmly or just sitting and being watchful or walking calmly, run over to that puppy and tell it what a good dog it's being. It's being such a good dog, lying quietly or sitting quietly or walking quietly. And that way I train my puppies to expect this exuberant response of belly rubs and ear rubs and all that kind of good stuff when I catch them doing good. And that way, when I do growl, when I do say no, they really they sort of like, what? Because they're used to lots and lots of praise. So that's my general rule. It's worked really well for me because you don't have to correct them a lot if they're used to praise and they want praise. I don't use a lot of treats. For me, it's all belly rubs and ear rubs, and that's what my dogs grow to expect, to tell them that they're doing a great job. And if I growl, then they're all looking at me like, okay, what happened? Who did something bad? Who was it? What did they do? But that's worked really well for me. In terms of, training puppies to livestock, I think I already went over this. My general rule is always through a fence first. So you're going to have your puppy on one side, and whatever the stock is, you're going to have on the other side. Next, after the puppy is not being reactive to that, they're sort of getting bored with it, then you put the puppy on a leash and you into the area on a leash, and that way you can correct very closely. And then after the puppy's sort of starting to get acclimated to that and not be reactive to that, then I throw them on a long lead, maybe 20, 30 feet of rope tied to a belt loop on me. And I just kind of let them do their thing, sniff around, eat the poop. Eating the poop of their livestock charges is very, very normal. And in a bonding exercise, actually. And so I let them roll in it, eat it, whatever. But as long as they're not chasing, as long as they're being calm and still, then they get nothing but praise for me. And then the next step is, to try tethering them or tie them to a tire for a little bit. And then you go out of sight and wait and see if they maintain that good behavior while you're not there. And then you eventually get to the point where you have the dog in there with you unsupervised, and you have also sort of watched the dog and monitored the dog, supervised the dog enough that you can walk away and see how the dog does when you're gone. One of the nice things about living in 2024 is you can just go out and buy yourself a little security camera setup with a solar controller on it, set it up anywhere on your property, or trail cams, whatever, that live stream to your phone. And you can actually watch what your dog is doing. And with some of the contain and train systems, I know Sport Dog makes a good one, you can actually correct your dog from your screen, from your phone when they're not doing something you want. So there's some very powerful tools out there that we have now that we didn't have, even 5 years ago. We didn't have satellite tracking collars and stuff like that were affordable to your average person. But now we have some really good tools, and I highly recommend that you use them both for containing the dogs and training them.
So excuse me, John Scott has a 1-year-old male Maremma, and he's got some ewes that are about to lamb, and he wants to know how do the young dogs usually do with young lambs.
Well, you never want to leave them together and then find out the hard way, right? So you take it step by step. He's still a young dog. One is not an adult dog by any means. You're probably right in that 13 to 15 age for humans where they're wanting to test every single boundary. They want the car keys, but none of the responsibility that goes along with it. So that is actually, a somewhat questionable time to start a dog, fresh and new with lambing or kidding or whatever. I would have the dog in there with you supervised. If you're in there and they're actively lambing or kidding, then you can focus on the dog and its actions without, harming what's going on with the lambing and kidding and all that. Then that's a great way to introduce them. Put them on a long line on your belt loop, and that way you can jerk it if they do anything untoward. Um, some dogs get involved in it. Some dogs want to clean off the lambs. Some dogs want to eat the afterbirth. Some dogs will separate the lambs from the mamas. So you have to be very careful about that. Need to let the mamas establish their territory and claim their lambs and start feeding their lambs before you get a dog involved. If you do have a stillbirth lamb or afterbirth lying around, it's very typical for your dog to eat it, primarily so that it won't attract further predators. Some people get really horrified when their dog goes and eats a stillborn lamb or kid, but the truth is that that's what they're supposed to do because you don't want the local coyotes or bobcats or whatever to come searching around because something smells really nicely decomposing. So the dogs are supposed to take care of that for you. But I would just monitor, supervise. By the time your dog is, 2 and they're lambing, or 3 and they're lambing, then you probably don't need to supervise them very much. But a 1-year-old dog, again, you're not going to want to give the 14-year-old the car keys and just let him take off. So you're going to want to be in a supervisory role. At a very least, what you could do is you could pen your dog outside the fence to the lambing area, so they get the experience of it without being in it. Or you could just separate them with a fence so that they get the experience, but they're not in the experience. And that's how I would handle it for a dog of that age.
So Jocelyn has the next question. She said, would Maremmas be a good option for a 20-acre property that they rotationally graze in about 3-acre sections? She says they're just getting started or are just starting to get a population of coyotes in their area, and the numbers are high enough that they're ready to invest in a livestock guardian dog.
Yeah, so that sounds like an ideal situation for a livestock guardian dog. And depending on your predator load, one Maremma can handle all 20 acres without problems. On the other hand, my guy in the Sierra Nevadas who lives on a an actual wildlife corridor, his predator load is so hard he can't do it with fewer than 3 to 4 LGDs. So a lot of it depends on your predator load and on the area that you're at, but a 20-acre property is perfectly fine. These dogs are so intelligent and they are so capable of handling whatever situation you give them. I know Maremmas that are comfortable estate guardians on 2-acre properties, and I know Maremmas that my customer has 80,000 acres, and he runs about 16 Maremmas, and they move around rotationally with his sheep and cattle. So yeah, absolutely, you can use a Maremma in that situation. If you're going to have the dog in with your livestock in separate pens as they rotate, then you may need to have a dog that's also a perimeter guardian that essentially can move around between the pens and defend the perimeter so that a predator can't get in kind of in between the cracks. One Maremma might be able to take care of the whole 20 acres. You might find yourself more comfortable with more. For me, because I have a really, really high predator load of both coyote packs, bobcats, mountain lions, eagles, hawks, and all the little ones that are annoying, like skunks and raccoons and weasels and all that kind of stuff. I have a very high predator load. And so, I run a lot of dogs on a relatively small property, just over 16 acres. And my property is very steep, so the dogs can't see each other from one side to the other. And depending on whether there's fog or not, they might not even be able to hear each other barking. So I have to run enough dogs that somebody's covering all the perimeter at all the times. And then mama stands up top and gives directions. But it's very, I know people who have two dogs out with 2,000 head of, sheep in the middle of nowhere on 10,000 acres, and those two dogs do just fine. And the rule is, are you losing livestock? People are like, well, I don't know if I need more. If you have one Maremma and you're not losing livestock, whatever you're running, whatever your stock is, however big your property is, then guess what? You don't need another Maremma. They're doing the job. So the rule is, if you're starting to lose stock, that's when you need to add more. Now, they do make good companions. A male female companion pair is kind of an ideal thing to have. But there are a lot of people who work just fine with having, male dogs or just female dogs, or running, a mix like I do. And a pair is Canines are pack animals. So I would never sell or place a Maremma puppy at a farm that didn't have any other canines on it. If they even had a house dog, the Chiweenie could come out and play at meal times. That's good enough. That's some pack time for a Maremma. But, in terms of their all overall mental health and happiness, having a companion pairs to handle different situations works really well. But you don't necessarily need to go out and get yourself 10 dogs. Like I said, the guy with 80,000 acres doesn't need, that many more dogs. So I think people tend to underestimate how much they can handle. So I always recommend, if you're new to this, get one, get one dog. And just, work with that dog, train that dog, watch that dog. And then, 6, 9 months, maybe a year later, go get your second one if you really feel that your predator load, makes that sensible.
Completely agree with everything you're saying here. Um, oh, Karen has the next question. She says she has a small farm in Lincoln, Massachusetts. She's looking for a Maremma to guard some free-ranging chickens from hawks, weasels, foxes, and sometimes protect sheep from coyotes. The area to be guarded is small since they're using managed grazing. The paddocks that she rotates through are about a quarter of an acre. She says the chickens are in a small side front yard next to the house. All the areas are fenced with woven wire or electric high tensile. And let's see here. She says the breed standard includes females from 65 to 66 pounds, but she can't find anything smaller than 78 to 80. So she's looking for a smaller Maremma and wanted to know if you have any recommendations.
Well, first, just on the description of your farm, an ideal perfect situation would be, since you're not on a big parcel of land, is to make sure that the whatever LGD you get can access the perimeter fence at all times, because one LGD on a couple of acres can do the job perfectly fine all by themselves, with a couple of companion dogs, to keep them happy or whatever, just by being able to cruise the perimeter of a fairly small property. On the issue of, what was the actual question? I'm sorry, Bill. There was a
She's looking for just an overall smaller dog in like the 65 to 66 pound range, but she can't find anything that's smaller than about 78 to 80 pounds.
Yeah, and as long as I have been involved in the Maremma breed, so since basically 2012, 2013, I have never seen Maremmas that are as small as the breed standard, commonly. The very, very first Maremma that I was privileged to get was probably 40 pounds at 4 months. And she, at her fighting weight, was probably 120. Um, I do have one 95-pound female who's the littlest dog on my farm. And I've purchased dogs from all over the world and all over the country for my breeding program. So it just seems to me that in the US, Maremmas are on the bigger side. And I think part of that is that they're not show dogs, they're working dogs, and they're actually having to take on and defend against predators. And, in my case, I've got mountain lions. I need a big dog. Mountain lions here can be up to 90 pounds. I need a dog that's quite a bit bigger than that, because the Maremmas that I know that have taken on and have won fights against mountain lions, which is they've never lost, but I'm just saying the ones that I know of that actually engaged in a fight with a mountain lion really needed the way that they killed the mountain lion was to leap in the air, come down, and literally crush its spine at its neck with their jaws and just flatten the lion underneath them. And they wouldn't be able to do that if they were smaller dogs. So I truly actually do not know of a breeder here in the US who is breeding Maremmas who are in the 60 to 70 pound range. My dogs are that big by the time they're 6 or 7 months old. In general, most of my dogs are put on about 10 pounds per month until they're a year old. And then that's when they sort of start if they're going to be on the smaller size. But, the Abruzzo Mastiff, which is, the historically older DNA in the breed, those dogs were routinely 70, 80, 90, 100 kilograms, which is up to 200 pounds. I have a 175 Maremma, 175-pound Maremma. He was my foundation stud, had perfect, excellent hips, OFA hips. And he's still out there, running the perimeter every single day. And he's I wouldn't want him any smaller, because part of the deterrence is his size. Now, I will say that I think he is a better guardian, because I do have a 95-pound female who is incredibly agile, and they make a great pair in terms of keeping off really significant predators. What happens in your neighborhood when you move a Maremma in is you're moving in a new apex predator. And that new apex predator is setting up a new territory. And all the other predators in the area are having to learn, okay, you can't go in here. It belongs to this apex predator. And so, the bottom line is, to be a true apex predator, you have to be willing to fight off, and if need be, kill other predators that are testing your boundaries. And what I have found with the Maremma breed is they have no problem doing that. I know that dogs that I've sold to places like Canada, they have to have, and Alaska, they have to have larger packs of the Maremmas, because they do get wolf packs or wild hogs or grizzlies, all of which are predators that really probably require, really, if you got a grizzly that wants to make your territory its territory, that's probably a 3-dog minimum, a 3 Maremma situation. If you've got large wolf packs in your area, then you may need even more, because to set up a territory that another apex predator will respect, you simply have to have, be the baddest ass fighting force in the neighborhood. And so that can require more dogs. But on the other hand, I know of farms that are 20 acres with 1 dog and handles it all fine. So it really depends on your circumstances.
That's why, can you hear me when I speak?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
That's why I was stating, though, that the chickens are being protected by red-tailed hawks, and the sheep would be protected from the largest predator, would be a coyote, which around here might hit 70 pounds, but mostly they're 50s. So having, a really large dog is just overkill. It's as if I'm getting a big dog just to have a big dog. The predators for the chickens are things like weasels and skunks and raccoons, but mostly it's the hawk. So when you said about combining area, I have a big perimeter fence, but the subdivisions, I could set it up so the dog could go from subdivision to subdivision, but the chicken is actually in a separate area. It's not very big. So I was thinking of using the dog during the day for the chickens and at night, if necessary, for the sheep. It's all, but I think what I'm trying to say is I wanted a modest dog for basically modest protection. and I didn't want to just get a big dog. Not that I have anything against big dogs if you have big predators, of course.
Yeah, I think that just in my experience, it's going to be very, very hard to find a well-bred Maremma that is as small as you're looking for.
But sorry,
that,
Italy perhaps help? Do they have I mean, they have wolves, but do they perhaps smaller lines there?
Well, it depends. I mean, you can find whatever you want if you got enough money and time to go get it. In Italy, I would say the folks who are breeding the Maremma dogs breed slightly smaller dogs. But I got to be honest, I've been to Italy and met Italian Maremmas, and they're not a whole lot smaller.
That's that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and again, because they're not a show dog, the breed standard is essentially, at least in the US, they're not a show dog. The breed standard is something that was invented, by the Italians, and that's what we keep as our breed standard out of respect for the fact that they're an Italian dog. This may not be the breed for you if you want a smaller livestock guardian. I do know that there are lines of smaller Pyrenees. Or you could just put out the word that you're trying to find a breeder that breeds smaller dogs, and maybe I'm not a person who can tell you that, because like I said, my smallest dog is 95 pounds, and she's just 95 pounds of I'll take it on whatever it is. So I'm not. If you consider a dog that big to be overkill for your farm, because a smaller dog can handle raptors, and you don't even really need it. I mean, a 50-pound coyote is huge. If you have a 70-pound coyote, I'm wondering if that's a coyote or a coy dog, because I mean, I've got plenty of really big coyotes in my neighborhood. About the biggest male you'll find is 50 pounds, probably average is more 40. Even the big cats, mountain lions are 80 to 90 pounds. They're not that big.
Right. Yeah, the big coyotes out here supposedly have a little bit of there's a kind of wolves that they cross with, but it's a very low percentage. They're not common. I agree with you. They're mostly the big ones around here are 50.
Yeah. I would say if having a smaller dog is important to you, then you're either going to have to do some fairly good research and find a breeder in the US who's breeding smaller dogs together, or you're going to have to look for a breed that's generally smaller. And there are some, the Kuvas is a little bit smaller than Maremma, Sarpleniacs, so you may just look into a different breed.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. So next question is from Scott, and he's got a 3-year-old Maremma that has always walked straight-legged in the back. When she moves more quickly, he says her gait seems normal. He wants to know if you think this is an issue.
So they're running okay, but walking not.
Yeah, walking is very straight-legged, but running, she seems to have more of a normal gait.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a veterinarian, and an expert on the physiology of Maremmas. I can that there's an echo, Rob. Is that fixable? Thank you. I would tell you that, she just may not have great hip joints, or she may have an issue with her knees. I know that, if I tweak this muscle, I can sit, but I can't stand. But if I tweak that muscle, I can walk, but I can't sit. So some of it might have to do with, a pulled muscle or tendon, or she just might not have ever really had the best hip joints. And, you're not really going to be able to know that unless you get them x-rayed and have a vet look at them and tell you what they think, or even send them into the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, the OFA.org, and have them examine them. So I think that, it sounds, a well-bred dog of any breed is going to not only walk comfortably and fluidly, but they're also going to be able to run comfortably and fluidly. And you can see that. And I can tell watching a dog run across my property, I can tell how good their hips are just by, if they look like they're floating on air, then they've got just terrific, fabulous hips. And they're single tracking, where they're bringing all four paws into one track. That's a good sign. Dogs that use both of their hind legs at the same time to push off generally have some kind of joint issue that's preventing them from being able to, pace with all four legs separate. Again, I'm not a veterinarian, but it does sound as though your dog might have some issues. Now, if the dog is young, some of that can be growing pains. I had one dog who went through 6 months of just, walking stilted and looking all like off kilter. And literally, I took him in to have him looked at so many times. I was worried about him. It was just growing pains. He grew out of it, and now he's an absolutely beautiful, perfect, amazing adult dog. But he did go through some growing pains and growing discomfort that was just a natural thing. The other issue is in older dogs, they start getting arthritic. I'm in my early 60s and I'm arthritic. I can tell you it doesn't feel good, and I don't feel like running necessarily. So once your dog starts to have age related arthritis and hip stiffness and stuff, that's something different too. Sometimes you can manage that with steroids or carprofen or whatever. You do need to, and this is a recent experience for me, you do need to keep an eye on your dogs and how comfortable they are walking and how fluid their movements are. I had a puppy that was starting to walk kind of strangely, sort of dragging her feet a little bit more. It turns out she's got meningitis. So I'm treating a puppy for meningitis because it has a neurological effect on the back end of the dog. So does eating macadamia nuts, come to find out. I found out the hard way. Macadamia nuts are a temporary toxin to dogs, and if they eat some macadamia nuts, it can even kill small dogs. For the large dogs, it usually just paralyzes them from the neck down for about 24 hours. I found that out the hard way too. But I would, if your dog is running and moving in a stilted manner, and it's a young dog, it could be growing pains. If it's an older dog, it could be arthritis. If it's a dog in between, then there probably is not proper conformation in those hips.
Next up is from Christine. She wants to know what your thoughts are on shaving the mats if they get out of hand in the coat.
This is another subject that can be controversial. For me, when they have mats going into the winter, I leave them alone, partially, especially if they're on their flanks and their back, the back of their legs, because I kind of think about it as that's their insulation for when they sit down and it's cold, it's wet, it's snowy, whatever. They've got a good inch or 2 inches thick of mats to sit on, that they're not putting their skin directly against the ground. When spring comes and they start blowing coat, I get very vigorous with using shears if necessary, trimmers if necessary. Slicker brush is probably, my number one go-to. And then I've got some mat combs that I use. The dogs generally won't really stay still long enough. I mean, they'll let me, they're very good. I've trained them all to, being groomed, but they don't tolerate noises. So I can't use Dremels on their nails or blow dryers to blow their coat out or anything. So it's really just a question of catching them a couple of times a week and working on a mat. In the summertime, I will shave their bellies, just so that they get that ground to belly contact to keep them cooler, especially like in a mud pit or whatever. It does keep them cooler to have that bare skin there. But I don't like to shave really anywhere else. If the mats are really bad, I pull them out as much as I can with a slicker brush. You can also use cornstarch, which is a great way to work mats out. The rule on cornstarch, though, is your dog has to be absolutely dry. You cannot have a damp mat and put cornstarch in it. It'll just turn to glue. But cornstarch works very well to work mats out of dry hair. And then there's something called Cowboys Delight. I'm trying to
Magic.
Cowboy's magic. Yeah, cowboy magic. That's a horse detangler, but it also works really well on dogs. If I have an area like I have, let's say I haven't trimmed the mats for this time of year when it's cold and rainy, when they do start to blow their coat, I might take my clippers, and if the mats, I'll pull them away from the skin with the slicker brush, and then I'll take my clippers, and as long as there's at least a half an inch to an inch of hair between the mat and the skin, then I'll just clip those mats off. It's usually their tummies, their hind quarters, um, on the ruff around their neck. I never use clippers. I try not to use scissors. I just try and work on it with a slicker brush or a mat comb, and some of the cornstarch or cowboy magic, something like that. So that's what's worked well for me. I don't recommend shaving the dogs ever, because Maremmas for the most part are pink underneath all that white fur. There are parts of them that are dark. They can have, splotches and be mottled or whatever, but any of that pink skin that you expose through over trimming or over clipping or whatever, they can get sunburn. They can start getting fly speck, from getting a little sunburn area can turn into a hot spot, can get all fly speck. Next thing you know, you've got, maggots crawling around, and it's just nasty. So you have to be really careful of their pink parts in the summers. There's a lot of Maremmas get a pink nose as they age, and in the summer I usually have to protect that. I've tried putting all kinds of different things on it, and they all have their pros and cons. So what's worked the best for me actually is I go and I buy the cow fly tags from Tractor Supply, and I cut those in a piece, because it's meant for, like, a 1,200-pound cow. So I'll cut a piece off of it, stick a hole through that with a zip tie, and zip tie it on their collar. And at the very least, what that does is it keeps the flies off of any hot spots or any other sunburns, anything like that, so that they don't get worse. And then, I treat with, depending on the situation, I treat with different things. If it's a place like where they can't lick, I'll use Blue Coat, because Blue Coat lasts a really long time, will prevent a sunburn, cleans up any kind of nastiness in an open hole. But it's not good for them to lick. It's pretty powerful stuff. So, there's other products too that you can put on. Horsefly products worked as well too, but I really found that the cow fly tags are the best protection from fly speck and maggots and all that kind of stuff.
So next up, this is a good question here from Patricia. She wants to know, how do you know when to retire your dog? She's got a male Maremma that seems to be getting grumpier the older that he gets. And so, what's things to kind of look for? And then, once you make that decision, what's the best life for the retired dog after that?
Well, and of course, this is going to be a dog specific answer, because there's just not going to be one situation that applies to every single dog. Like I said, my oldest Maremma, she's 12, almost 12 now. And she doesn't move a whole lot. My property's steep. From my house, you have to go downhill to get anywhere. And she does that maybe once or twice a day. She'll go down and kind of check on, the sheep pen, or check on the cows, and then come back up. Whereas the other dogs are going up and down the hill all day long, multiple times. She doesn't want to retire. She doesn't want to live inside. She wants to hang out at the highest point on the property and tell everybody what to do. And I guess for me, I've decided I'm just going to follow their cues. If I have a dog that wants to come inside all the time, because they're getting older and arthritic and tired, whatever, then I know they're ready to retire, right? They're telling me they're coming in whenever the door's open, they're staying in. Right now, I don't have one Maremma on my property that's interested in coming in and staying in the house. They might come in, sniff around the kitchen, see if I was stupid enough to drop something yummy, but then they immediately want to go out. So I think it's really going to depend on the signals that your dog is giving you in terms of retirement. And, there are some Maremmas who just, they're done with the running. It hurts. They don't want to do it anymore. And they just move in and become a fabulous house dog. I would definitely have your vet evaluate, because If the dog doesn't want to come in and doesn't want to stop, but they're limping a lot or they're getting grumpy, grumpy means pain to me. Maybe the dog needs to be on carprofen, which is the doggy version of ibuprofen, or maybe they need to be on a steroid to reduce inflammation. So I would really let the dog make the decision, because if the dog is okay working less and being, inside the house, then they're kind of telling you how they want to retire. I sort of think of it as, when my parents got elderly, they very much did not want to go into a retirement home or a retirement community or assisted living or anything like that. They wanted to be independent. It's kind of the same with your dogs. They're kind of just going to decide what their retirement looks like. Probably the most important thing for you to do is, before your dog is getting really to the retirement point, is get another dog in and get them trained up. So, I think that you really want to get a younger dog in there and get them trained up to take over, so that your older one can retire and can do less if they're really not up to it. I hope that addresses your issues and answers your question.
Next up, we have a question from Ben. He's got issues with dogs moving themselves from one group of sheep to another. He operates on a larger property in open country, he says. He's got a few different groups of sheep, some at the headquarters, some 1 to 4 miles away from each other. He says most of his dogs are 2 to 4 years old. They're Anatolian Akbash crosses, and he wanted to know what your thoughts were all on dealing with that situation.
Well, again, my general rule is, if you're not losing livestock, they're doing their job. So, unless there's a highway, on this 4 mile stretch or whatever, unless you're actually concerned about the dogs traveling and wandering off of your property onto somebody else's property, or having to deal with road traffic or whatever, I wouldn't worry about it. It sounds to me like your dogs have got the job done. You're not losing any sheep, no matter the fact that they're miles away from each other. The dogs are managing to, pack up and communicate and work exactly as livestock guardian dogs should. So I don't know that I would change anything about your situation. Now, if you've got a road running through the middle, or they're crossing somebody else's property, or you've got some major reason why you need to keep them in, then I would suggest that you go with either hot wire or radio frequency wire, and try to set up a perimeter so that they know where they can't cross. And I've had tremendous success with that, breaking dogs that were really, really intent on going to visit the neighbors every day. They are broken of that habit because I installed the radio frequency containment wire.
Yeah, I would also mention on that one, I agree. A lot of times, folks, the dogs know better where predators are than we do. And, if they're leaving an area, as long as you're not having predation, they're doing their job. We've had really good success with GPS-based invisible fences, and so that's another option for you if you have a very large ranch. Most of the companies can set up, multiple size, different shapes, and everything else for the systems. So,
yeah,
folks,
the only issue I have with the GPS geofencing is there's not a physical barrier there to tell the predators where to stop, right? So the only physical barrier is your dog. Your dog has to be just in the right place at the right time, if you're just doing geofencing. And the other thing I find about the geofencing collars is they have a very, very short battery life. So I tried the Halo collar. I had to buy 2 for every dog, because I had to charge. They were only good for 12 hours. So I had to be charging one for daytime use, and then charging the other one for nighttime use. And it was just a ridiculous expense, and it wasn't that great. For far less money, I bought, radio frequency containment fencing, invisible fencing, which I didn't bury. I just, I zip tied it to my T-post, no climb wire around my property, and it works fantastic. And if there's an area, like I've got multiple gates, I want the dogs to be able to go through the gates, then you just twist the wire at that one point. And it makes it so the dogs can go in and out without receiving any kind of correction. So I've found that is a very consistently good system. But again, if you're on 1,000 acres or something, it may not work that well. Now, if you're on large properties, it's probably best to just go with hot wire. I mean, you can get a little solar box that will charge up to 15 miles of hot wire. And of course you're going to have to place it carefully so that it's dog proof, because it's not like woven fencing or electric net fencing or whatever. It's just one line, so you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about about making it so the dogs don't go through it. But I again, my basic rule is, if you're not losing livestock, the dogs are doing their job, and you don't need to know how it works, because you'll never understand it, because you're not a canine. So I just let them do their job, and as long as I'm not losing predator and losing livestock, I don't, like the other day I said they killed a coyote. I hadn't seen them kill a coyote for 4 or 5 years. But guess what? I didn't lose any stock in those 4 or 5 years, so I didn't care. The dead coyote popped up, had been mauled and taken down by one of my dogs. I know which one it was, because he was sitting there with a big grin and blood all over it around his face. And that's what I said. Oh, guess what? Once again, they're doing their job. I didn't lose any livestock. Yes, here's a dead coyote to prove that, they're working. They're working every night. They're working every minute of those 24 hours that they're out there alone. But if you're not losing livestock, I wouldn't change anything.
Next up, and folks, I am going to say we're going to have to probably cut the questions off with who's posted them in the chat already. If you haven't posted one, send it to me and I'll get it to Sarah. But Sherry has a question. She wants to know, does your DNA panel for breeding dogs include a test for breed in addition to health tests, or do you have 2 separate tests?
There again, the DNA panels are kind of controversial too, because your DNA results are only going to be as good as the inputs that you can put into the system. And Maremmas are not a common breed. They're a rare breed. So, even if you're going to Embark or Wisdom or whatever, one of these companies, and you're asking for a DNA panel, if they only have 50 of that dog in their database, then that's all the information they're going to have. And that's the best information they're going to give you, is based on 50 dogs. So while I do use the genetic testing for kind of a general overall, I want to be better informed about these things, I don't take anything that they say to be written in stone. I think that the research and the database building and all of that on these DNA panels is still relatively new, and they may do great for dogs like German Shepherds or Labradors that have thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of dogs in the database. But for a breed like the Maremmas, where there might only be maybe 50 to 100, maybe 500 dogs in the database, you're going to have a limited amount of good genetic information that you can actually get out of that. So I am not wedded to doing genetic testing on the dogs. I think it gives limited results. And I think that on the other hand, if you have a coupon for 60% off an Embark panel and you want to have it done, then I think there's nothing wrong with that. I want you to be aware it's going to be based on a fairly small number of dogs in the database.
So my question, Sarah, is really, I totally get what you're saying, but a lot of people are requesting DNA testing on breeding parents for puppies. And when I did my companion dogs, I did a test that showed me their breed, an estimate of what their breed was, which gave us a couple of surprises, but also it had health tests. When I went to do it on my breeding animals, I sent it in and it came back with no breed. So they have a breeder's panel that I chose because it had more tests that it does, but it doesn't include breed. So I didn't get any information about their breed or ancestry estimates. So I'm just wondering, what do you do for that?
Well, I mean, I got to be honest. I did genetic testing. I used Wisdom Panel and I used Embark, and I think there was one other one, and I did them on like 6 different dogs. and they all came back 100% Maremma. They all came back with very limited information that I can use on things like whether they have tendencies towards certain types of cancers or what. But I just did it really for my own interest. If I had somebody who was that interested in getting the genetic background on the parents, I might split the cost with them of doing a genetic panel, because I just don't do it typically. It's not something my buyers are asking for, and like I said, it had limited value to me, and I tried 3 different companies. So I just, for me, it's not a crucial thing. If people that you're placing puppies with, it's very important to them, then maybe say, hey, I got a coupon, and you throw $50 in, I'll throw $50 in, and we can get, mom and dad tested just so you can see what's on there. What I have done in the past when somebody wanting a puppy wants that done is I've pulled out one of the panels that I had done, and I show it to them, and I'm like, this is what you get. I mean, it's a lot of money for, this very small, limited, and not necessarily accurate, information. So again, I think that there's a lot of utility to them. I think they're getting better all the time. Very much hope that, that in a few years we'll be able to use them as a really, really powerful tool in breeding programs and stuff like that. And they'll have identified diseases, illnesses, conditions, whatever, that are endemic in the population, and we'll be able to use genetic testing to identify that and choose our breeding pairs accordingly. But they're not there yet. And so for me, it's not worth spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on getting dogs genetically tested. Or, I know Embark has like a breeder's panel and a pet panel. And they've, to a certain extent, you got to remember, these companies are marketing, and they're very good at marketing. What you get back is not necessarily what you need. So for me, I'm not that into it. It's not like I genetically test every single one of my dogs.
Got it. Thank you so much.
So next up is a question from Valerie. She wants to know, do you ever worry about the dog's collars getting caught on fences? In the past, she hasn't collared her dogs.
I collar my dogs. With a smaller, less powerful breed, I probably would worry about having them get caught on fences. But my experience is, if a Maremma doesn't want that collar on, the collar's going to tear. It doesn't matter if it's brass, if it's leather, if it's nylon. I find, the ones that don't like wearing collars, they just lose them. But I've never had a problem. The breed is big and powerful enough that they really don't make a collar that could, the dog can't tear out of it. That's my experience. I do know that, I've heard horror stories about dogs being chained to trees and literally asphyxiating themselves, or dogs with a big heavy collar getting it stuck on fencing and basically, again, hanging themselves. I have heard those stories. It's never been an issue for me. Again, maybe I'm buying collars. Buy the breakaway collars if you really have a concern with it. The breakaway collars will all just, snap if they get pulled hard enough. So that's an option for you. But, it is important to me to make sure that my dogs have a collar with their name and my phone number on it in the event of a breakout or, anything else. Like, I live in a high fire zone, and so we could have to evacuate, and I might have to leave my dogs behind with sheep or whatever. So I always want to make sure they're all chipped, but I want to make sure they're all collared with my number on them. So if you have a concern with that, I would definitely look into breakaway collars or halters. You could use a halter too.
I guess the other thing I just add on that is, the collar probably shouldn't be so tight that the dog can't struggle and get free from it.
Yeah.
All of our dogs at the centers wear collars. We have lots and lots of brush in our pastures, and we've never had a dog get hung up and die. We've have dogs come up missing collars sometimes, but like I said, the collar it's not so loose where it just falls off. If you catch the dog and put it on a leash, it doesn't just pull right out of it. But if they struggle hard enough, they can definitely, remove the collar. So,
Yeah, for me, when you're putting a teaching training collar on a dog or a containment collar on a dog, they generally recommend that you be able to fit like 2 fingers in between that collar, so it's very tight. Typically, if I just have a regular collar on, I could probably put, a whole hand. I could slide it underneath the collar. Um, the collar is tight enough that I couldn't slide the collar off their head just by pushing with my hand. But again, just like Bill said, at my house there's either no collar, no collar left, but I've never had a dog come anywhere close to being injured by one, and that may just be because, again, I don't keep them on ultra tight, but they are on all the time.
so our last question for today is from Sky. She has another question here. She says, "Do you ever supplement feed puppies from extra large litters? How do you monitor puppies, and what is the metric to know when to intervene?"
So one of the things that didn't come up today, and it was kind of interesting because it usually does, is feeding. What do you feed your dog? And so I had the best advice ever from a vet who was just getting ready to retire. So I think he was just finally telling the truth. I asked him, this was back when grain free all of a sudden went from being like the perfect new, thing to do for your dogs, to there being studies out of Tufts veterinary school about problems with grain free diets. And so I went to my vet and said, "What the heck do I feed now?" I was very happy with the diet I had. And he looked at me and gave the best answer ever. He said, "Do you eat the same thing every day, 24/7, 365?" And I was like, and I just, all of a sudden I realized that all these allergies, all these problems, so many health issues could probably be, ground down to the dogs getting the same diet all the time. Think about it. There's just not every single diet is going to have, all its vitamins and ingredients in the same amount. So I just started buying. I have like 4 different brands I go to. I use the Costco Kirkland brand, not the grain free thing, but the regular Costco Kirkland food. I use Diamond Naturals. I use the Tractor Supply for Health brand, and I don't know. I'm thinking of something else that I use. And I have every single time I open a bag of food, it's a different flavor, different manufacturer. And then I supplement with coconut oil, with an oil. So it could be fish oil, sardine oil. It could be leftover oil from cooking, olive oil, coconut oil. And then I supplement a lot of raw eggs, raw chicken parts. And I use a lot of kefir. So kefir is essentially like a drinkable yogurt. It's even easier to make than yogurt. And I add kefir to almost all my dog's diets, almost at least once a day. And it's just got a ton of probiotics in it. It can have up to 65 different strains of probiotics, and it's just great for their digestive health. But my basic rule is they never get the same thing twice in a row. So they have very, very broad gut bacteria spectrums, whereas a dog is getting the same food every single meal is going to have a very limited number of probiotics that they've even been exposed to that even exist in their gut. So I go for the broadest gut health I can as possible. Now, I think your question was supplementing puppies. I did have a very big litter and needed to do some supplementation. You can buy the powdered colostrum and the powdered baby, milk supplement that covers everything from kittens to cows, or you can get specific ones just for dogs or whatever. It can be a very, somebody mentioned cow's milk. So once you ferment cow's milk with the mother, it's actually called a curd in kefir. It breaks down all the cow's milk proteins that aren't good for dog gut, so like the casein and stuff like that. So you don't have to worry about using cow's milk for that, although I know people who prefer goat's milk or sheep's milk, and that works fine. You don't have to worry about the proteins so much with those. But the powdered colostrum, the powdered supplement milk, you can use for really, really tiny puppies. You have to use an eyedropper, and it's just it's a lot of work, and at least in my experience, I mean, I know that I generally can't save a puppy that's less than 11 ounces. I can't get enough nutrition into them for them to thrive. So it's a very tough situation. But I do have, I have eye droppers. I start with that when they're really tiny, like newborn. The first 3 days, they might just get colostrum for a day by eye dropper, and then the regular puppy supplement milk. I do can and have and probably will in the future make my own. There's lots of recipes for puppy supplement milk online. I use the one that's basically evaporated milk and egg yolk, some Caro syrup, and a little bit of yogurt, and use your blender and blend it all up. And I'm probably missing an ingredient, water. um, but you can also use the packaged dry foods and go from an eyedropper to a bottle, and then hopefully from a bottle to a teat. And right now I have a large, actually split into two. It's split into the big hogs and the little ones, because I have to move mama from whelping bed to whelping bed to make sure that the littles aren't getting pushed off by the bigs. So she actually has two completely separate whelping beds with about half the puppies in each, because the littles just can't handle the competition from the big ones. So I just get creative with that. But yes, you can supplement either with your own homemade puppy food, or you can use the powdered puppy foods in an immersion blender and bottle feed that.
Folks, that's going to wrap up our webinar for today. I do want to thank Sarah for taking time out. I know we went kind of way over today, so thank you very much, ma'am. Lots of great information that we got today, and I appreciate you taking some time out to help the producers on our channel here. I do want to mention again, if you're looking for GPS tracking, I'd recommend Lone Star Tracking here. They support our webinars along with Spot On Fence. The Sheep and Goat Predator Management Board for providing funding for the program. And I want to thank Dr. Redden and Robert Pritz again also. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email me those, and I can get them over to Sarah. Or I'm sure you can probably find her farm online. You have a website and all that good stuff, I'm assuming, Sarah.
I don't have a website. I have a Facebook page. It's Sky Island Farm. I'm the only one on there with that moniker, Sky Island Farm. And you can get on there and you can ask me questions directly, or you can look at all the pictures of my animals and my dogs and stuff that I have on my page. But I'm not, I don't have a big website presence. Most of my relationships in the breed I make by talking to people on the phone, or doing a video call with them, because I don't have applications or anything like that. For me, it's all about the relationship. So I form a relationship with people, and then I can help mentor them.
Sounds
Thanks
good
for this. I really appreciate the opportunity, Bill, and it's been great, and people are welcome to go to my Facebook page and PM me, and I will give them all the best ideas I have.
We sure appreciate that. And again, I really appreciate you taking some time out. I look forward to working with you some more in the future. So,
Me too. You guys take care.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll see. Our next webinar should be in May. And as always, it'll be the third Thursday at 3:00, folks. Check our Facebook page for whatever the next one coming up will be. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.